I do see a long-term ownership position, and I see it bringing great stability to that part of the Middle East and maybe the entire Middle East.
Morning glory and evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt in Studio West. May I have 10 minutes of your time and have you listen closely to an appeal for humility? Because in the 12 hours since President Trump made that statement about the United States in Gaza, I've seen 100 takes, I've heard dozens, and none of them come with context or humility. Now, I know a little bit about land use law. I spent 27 years advising the largest landowners in Southern California and Nevada, one project in Palau, on the front end, land use permitting, development agreements, federal agency, state, local agency permitting, that kind of stuff. So I know a little bit about development. Don't know anything about actually building the buildings, but about entitlements. I know almost nothing about Gaza that I haven't read. I've never been there. I've only been to Israel twice. But I began this monologue by doing just some basic research about how big is Gaza. We know there are 2 million Gazans, right? Roughly 2 million Gazans. In context, there are 112 million Egyptians. There are about 11 million Jordanians, 2 million Gazans. There are more Palestinians in Judea and Samaria. That's the population context. How about the size of Gaza? I want to put it into context for you. Gaza is 90,000 acres. I want to use a frame of reference. Most Americans understand what an acre of land is. They know they're on a quarter acre of land if they have a house, or a half acre of land. An acre. Gaza is 90,000 acres. In context, Disney World, all of Disney World, is 25,000 acres. The Woodlands development in Texas is 28,000 acres. The Villages in Central Florida is 35,000 acres. And Gaza is 90,000 acres. And you say, well, that's 3 times bigger than the largest master plan community we've ever done. No, not really. Because the Irvine Ranch, which is still being developed in Southern California, spans a couple of cities, Newport Beach and Irvine, and maybe further south. It's over 90,000. It's closer to 100,000 acres. Now, that's a lot of land, and none of it happens quickly. Every master plan community, MPC, takes 10 years minimum to get started, permitted, and building. And what the president is talking about there, Gaza 2050, whatever the plan in his mind is, he's been thinking about it a lot, because I've talked with him at least twice about it. Most recently on October 7th of last year, we talked about Gaza, and in a previous, I've talked to him more on the air than I think any other broadcast journalist has. I've only had like one private meeting with him and a half dozen private conversations, but I do most of my interviewing of the president on air. And when we've talked about it, he's always talked about it in the terms that he did yesterday. It's a beautiful piece of land that is in rubble and ruins. Now, Trump does know development. He knows a lot more about development than just development in Manhattan. He's developed in the Palos Verdes Peninsula in California. He's developed in Florida. He's developed around the world. He has Trump names on buildings in which he has an ownership stake in Chicago and in Nevada. I don't know what his ownership interest is, but ownership interest is not necessarily a real estate term of art. It's an accordion term. It can be a term of art. I'm going to take X percent of this project, or I'm going to handle that. Sometimes land developers entitle, and builders come in and take the entitled land and build on it. So it's not unusual to get a big land use development project with a dozen different builders building their best product that they have researched for that market. So I don't know what he has in mind. I know that he is used to developing, and I know development takes a long time. Another example, when I trundle in Northern Virginia, I will sometimes park at Gravelly Point, which is a parking lot sort of between Memorial Bridge and Reagan Airport. And you can run towards the Memorial Bridge and onto the mall from there, or you can run from Gravelly Point towards Mount Vernon as long as you want. When you go towards Mount Vernon, which I'll call roughly south, although some people say it's east, seems south to me, I've been running past or trundling past for almost 10 years now, the redevelopment of a corner of Old Town Alexandria where an old pumping station was, and where there's a very complicated redevelopment of that pumping station that took forever to dismantle, probably because it was very old and who knows what was in it. And they're dealing with water, and they're dealing with Clean Water Act, all sorts of issues. I don't think they're endangered species there, but Alexandria has a play in that. The state of Virginia has a play in that. The District of Columbia has a play in that. And the federal government has a play in that. So it's a complicated project. I never expected it to go up overnight, but it is taking forever. And they're working on it all the time. So that's a maybe 3-acre development. Now we're talking about 90,000 acres. Basically, I think what Trump has in mind is what George Washington had in mind when he hired L'Enfant to design the federal city. And if you've ever seen the room where it happened, the musical Hamilton, Jefferson, Madison, and Hamilton walk into a room, and Hamilton comes out with the National Bank, and Jefferson and Madison come out with a commitment that the federal city will be built on the banks of the Potomac. And George Washington took that agreement, and he hired a Frenchman, Pierre L'Enfant, who was really kind of mercurial, but genius. And he designed the beauty that is Washington, D.C. And over the years, it's evolved into parts that are beautiful and parts that are not. They've had incredible, quick evolutions when World War II came. David Brinkley, the late David Brinkley, wrote a book when Washington went to war about everything that they built on the mall because it was the only place to build stuff. And now it took forever to get it down. Then we had riots in 1967 in Washington, D.C., or 1968, I can't remember. And a lot of the city burned down, and a lot of this. But then there's a lot of gentrification. Now there's a lot of degentrification. Urban environments are complex, and it's best if you can begin with a blank slab, like the Irvine Ranch Company did, the Irvine Company, when they got the 100,000 plus Irvine Ranch, which was made up of 3 adjacent Mexican land grants that came into United States possession after the Mexican-American War. Now, that's just the land use side. What about the 2 million Gazans? Well, first of all, there are hostages in the tunnels. There are terrorists in the tunnels and above ground. Everything is booby-trapped, and the war has not been won. When the Marshall Plan was launched by George Marshall at Harvard, when he announced it at commencement, Germany was in rubble, lots of Europe was in rubble, but the Nazis were defeated. The terrorists here are not defeated. They have been deeply wounded, but they are not defeated. Douglas Murray wrote about this in the New York Post yesterday. You really can't begin the peace until the victory is secure. But it could be done. It could be done either if the Palestinians reject Hamas en masse, which is unlikely. If you listen to my interview with Haviv Rettig-Gur yesterday, which is at my YouTube channel, he'll explain to you the deep dysfunction in the Palestinian understanding of history. And it's very unlikely, unless we lean on Egypt and Jordan, that they'll take a proportionate share. So 112 million Egyptians, they would take 1.8 million of the Gazans and give them purple passports or something that says, in 3 years you can go back to Gaza, and in the meantime we got a redevelopment and demo the subway that's not a subway but a terrorist infrastructure. Jordan has 11 million people. Could they take 200, 300,000 Gazans for a few years? Perhaps. They might go back and you would clear it, and you would begin to lay out a plan, and you would stub up the infrastructure, and you would do everything that developers do. And it's wildly optimistic to think that can be done. But I know what I don't know. I don't know what Trump is thinking. Nobody does. And the same thing was said on countless newscasts, podcasts, and in op-eds about the tariffs. We don't know what Donald Trump is thinking or what his strategy is. And it is arrogant to say, oh, he's crazy, he's a lunatic. It's actually bad journalism. It's a poker tell that you've got Trump derangement syndrome, or long TDS at least, and that if you've promised to actually objectively cover Trump now, because he won so overwhelmingly, you've slipped off the wagon. If you had TDS and you're a recovering TDSer, you got to shake that off. I wrote about that for Fox News tomorrow morning. All I want, just some humility, please, about development, about Gaza, about Trump, about Bibi. We don't know what they're thinking or where they're going. All I know is that the first time I ever brought up Gaza, Yoni called me and said, "You don't ever want to go there. It's the worst place on earth." And I'll never forget that call. That's 20 plus years ago. And I'm here to tell you, I don't know and you don't know, and nobody who's opining on this knows. They just know what they think about Trump, and they're infusing their commentary about Gaza and Trump they're infusing their belief about Trump into their commentary about Trump and Gaza, and that's wrong. It's not journalism. It's hysteria. I'll be right back. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Part 2 of my conversation with you about humility and Donald Trump and Gaza. And if you're just tuning in, I want to set the stage again. Our TriCaster froze, so we couldn't use our beautiful pictures, big, beautiful pictures. Gaza is 90,000 acres. Right? That's how big it is. Disney World, by contrast, is 25,000 acres. Right? That's pretty big. A lot of Americans have a sense of how big Disney World is. The Woodlands development in Texas is 28,000 acres. So it's bigger than Disney World. But the villages where the old folks live in Central Florida, that's 35,000 acres. So Gaza is 3 times the size of the villages. And you say, well, that's just undoable. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. The Irvine Ranch, when they started developing it, was 100,000 plus acres. And it was the combination of 3 Mexican land grants. And the Irvine Company went through a couple of ownerships. It's now owned by Donald Bren. He's done a magnificent job on building it. He put a university on it, University of California, Irvine. He put Fashion Island on. It's just an amazing part of Southern California. And I think it was Mobil owned it first and then Brenda. But it takes a long time. There are master plan communities all over the United States. Can Gaza be a master plan community? Not with Hamas. Absolutely not with Hamas. Now, Donald Trump has been thinking about Gaza a long time. I want to go back to my program in October when I interviewed then candidate President Trump, and Gaza came up, cut number 5. Mr. President, you're a developer, so I want to talk to you about Gaza. I worked with land use developers for 35 years when I was actively practicing law. You know how to build things. Gaza is in ruins. Could Gaza be Monaco if it was rebuilt the right way? Could someone make Gaza into something that all the Palestinian people would be proud of, would want to live in, would benefit them?
It could be better than Monaco. It has the best location in the Middle East, the best water, the best everything. It is the best. I've said it for years. When I've been there, and it's rough. It's a rough place before all of the attacks and before back and forth, what's happened over the last couple of years. And I said, wow, look at this. I mean, they'd have the back of a plant facing the ocean. They'd have there was no ocean as far as that was concerned. They never took advantage of it. As a developer, it could be the most beautiful place. The weather, the water, the whole thing, the climate. It could be so beautiful. It could be the best thing in the Middle East, but it could be one of the best places in the world. And, there are other civilizations. I don't know if you know this. It's crazy, but that's been a rough neighborhood. That's been a rough place. Underneath that are 2 other civilizations where they were wiped out and they started over and they build on top. It's amazing. I mean,
do you think your
been
partners?
A very contentious area for a long time. I can tell you that.
Can you get the Abraham Accords going again and get your partners like UAE, Bahrain, and possibly Saudi to help you, and Egypt to help you in Gaza if you're president again, to rebuild it the right way and get rid of the fanatics?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, I think not only the Abraham Accords, the Abraham Accords is one of the great things that's ever happened in the Middle East. That should be loaded up with everybody right now. And, I made the statement the other day. People said, I would have gotten, in my opinion, 50-50 chance, maybe more than that. Iran would have been in the Abraham Accords. They wanted to make a deal so bad until
then we were off and talking about Iran. I want you to know, we have talked about Gaza before that. He's been thinking about, he's a land guy. Of course he's thinking about the land in the Mediterranean. Yesterday he does a joint press conference with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and he says cut number 3.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it. and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. Do a real job, do something different. Just can't go back. If you go back, it's going to end up the same way it has for 100 years.
All right. That's true. More than 100 years. Napoleon committed an atrocity. Napoleon ordered the execution of prisoners in Gaza 210 years ago. So it's not like it's going to change anytime soon. I don't know how many civilizations have been there. I heard John Podhoretz on the Commentary podcast say that was the home of the Philistines. I don't know. All I know is that I have humility about what can be done, except as to the fact that you can't rebuild with terrorists in place. I'm not humble about that. That is a fact. And Douglas Murray wrote about it yesterday. I have just posted on my X account the unedited 60 Minutes interview of Kamala Harris. It is 53 minutes long. It was released by the FCC today. I have not watched it. I just wanted to put the word out. Like I want to put the word out about one of our sponsors, myphdweightloss.com. Generalissimo, 864-644-1900 to connect you to myphdweightloss.com. That's
864-644-1900.
I'm going to come back to that, but first, I've been so into the Gaza stuff. I saw the Politico headline about the money they received from USAID. What is that story? What's the key component of that story?
So the key component of that story is when USAID stopped all outflowing payments. One of the payments happened to coincide with $8.5 million going to Politico over the last year, and it was such that there was like an $846,000 payment that should have been made to Politico. Didn't happen, so they missed payroll. Nobody on payroll of Politico got paid this cycle.
Do we have any idea how much money Politico has received from the federal, this is the United States
total
Agency for International Development?
Yes. USAID money went to Politico, the domestic news source started by Mike Allen and who else started?
They're not involved anymore.
No, I understand.
Mike Allen, Jim Vandehei.
Correct. So now we are learning more by this afternoon that through different agencies, Department of Education, just different departments funneled money into subscriptions to their VIP, their super subscription base. Their largest subscriber base of Politico is the federal government agencies, people in the agencies. And these are like $2,500 a year.
But how much total federal
$35 million. $35 million went to Politico from the federal bureaucracy.
Do we know over how many years yet?
No, that $35 million last year.
Nah, that can't be right.
$35 million last year went to Politico from the federal government.
Okay, there's a story at Red State by Bonchi that tipped me off to this. Tom Trout sent it to me. I just couldn't believe it. I said, that can't be right. Then Dwayne has been digging into it while I've been digging into Gaza. And I got to tell you, that's a scandal. That's a scandal. It became a left-wing talking point rag. Tim Alberta got mad at me years ago and stopped coming on the show because I said, God, they've gone to the left. The Ben Shapiro meltdown, remember? And now?
The most exquisitely timed exit of Politico ever was Olivia Beavers.
Oh, we're so glad, Olivia. There are some nice people that work there and good reporters. Corrupt.
Boy, did she get out at the right time, though.
Corrupt. Absolutely corrupt. When Mark Caputo sat down with
Tara Palmieri
and talked about how Politico doinked his stories that were critical of Biden. Well, now I at least have one reason why. Not just ideological. I think there was a lot of ideology there.
They were being paid off by...
They couldn't offend...
By the swamp.
They could not offend the mother's milk.
Right.
They could not kill the golden goose.
Yeah.
But I would like to know when it started. Did it start under Trump? I don't know that yet. MyPhdWeightLoss.com, though. Don't kill your golden goose by being too big of a golden goose, right?
Don't eat the golden goose. Yes.
Is goose on the not eat?
Well, actually, you can eat goose.
Yeah. I've
Goose
never
is-
actually
Yeah,
wanted...
it's the other white meat.
goose. Oh, you don't eat chicken?
No, you can eat chicken.
Can you eat pork?
Limited amounts of it.
Steak?
Oh, yeah.
All right, good.
Beef and chicken, you betcha.
All right, just checking. My PhD weight loss, Dwayne lost 50 pounds over 3 months, kept it off for 2 years, and I'm here to tell you it works. 864
644.
1900. Let me go back to my cut sheet. And my cut sheet has got a lot of Donald Trump in it today because he said a lot yesterday, most of which has been gone through. I want to go to Carolyn Levitt today. Let's look at number 10, Carolyn Levitt.
And I would just say a strong message to Democrats who are out there pretending to be outraged about the long list of crap that this administration is cutting, federal waste and funding, like $2 million for sex changes in Guatemala, $6 million to fund tourism in Egypt, $20 million on a new Sesame Street show in Iraq, $4.5 million to combat disinformation in Kazakhstan. I could go on, and I'm happy to provide this list to every single one of you. Democrats are outraged that the American people want to be, they want their taxpayers going to good uses, not stuff like this. But then they're very quiet about the fact that there are still North Carolinians and people in California who have lost everything. And in the last 4 years, this federal government did nothing to help them.
That's all that's all the same bucket of money. It's the money the Treasury disperses. So the executive branch has some limits on it, but as Andrew McCarthy said yesterday, and you can watch it on YouTube, Trump is testing the limits of executive authority over the unelected bureaucrats of the Article 2 authorities. And we're going to find out. I want to grab the wheel with Mary Catherine Ham, the host of the Getting Hammered podcast, and get right to the heart of it. Hello, Mary Catherine. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. I listened to Getting Hammered last week on a long trundle, and I stopped when you described the nation's report card. And I then dug into the nation's report card, and it's awful. It's so bad. And I'm just going to focus on reading. Between 2022 and 2024, every student in America, the top 10%, the bottom 10%, they all dropped in reading except the bottom 10%, which were illiterate. You can't get more illiterate. So you talked about that. How much of a crisis is this?
I mean, it's a huge crisis, and unfortunately, it was a predictable crisis. And a lot of this obviously comes from schools shutting down during the pandemic due to way overly cautious and sometimes teachers' union greed-influenced decisions at local levels in most major blue metro areas. They closed down schools for 18 months, and it turns out that was a real problem, and that you get real learning loss, and that you don't get it back by 2022, and that by 2024 you're seeing even worse effects. Some of that is because the people who first encountered the shutdowns were kindergartners at the time of the pandemic, and now they're the fourth graders being tested, and they simply didn't get what they needed because their local educators told them Zoom is great, Zoom is fine. It was never true. You could tell it wasn't true. And now we are paying a price for it. And there are like very few bright spots out there for any progress being made. And I know people with really good intentions are trying to make progress, but we dug ourselves a hole that is very serious for this generation of children.
Now, Mary Catherine, when my daughter, who's your age, was going into fourth grade, she had a magnificent fourth grade teacher. In the first parent-teacher conference, he said to us, you know, grades 1 through 3 is when you learn to read, so that grades 4 and onward, you read to learn. And I always thought that was brilliant and elegant. You learn to read so you can read to learn. If people can't read, they're crippled for life. So we ought to, and I'm putting this out as a proposition, stop everything, test everyone, and aggregate people by roughly grade level. Yeah, I mean, you don't want to put an 8th grader with a 3rd grader, but you do want to put the 8th and the 6th and the 4th graders who are all at the same reading level, and do nothing but read. The fetching Mrs. Hewitt said to me last night, all they ought to be doing is reading until everyone can read, because nothing, and we ought to go to year-round school. I mean, they're acting like nothing is wrong, but in fact, the whole edifice is collapsing. Am I alarmist?
No, you're not. You're not alarmist. The other thing that's happening is that there's how education works, pedagogy works, is that you get these trendy new curricula that come in. I mean, DEI and all the gender stuff is one thing, but there was at one point 20 or so years ago, a new curriculum that came in for reading that actually doesn't work. And it turns out basic phonics is much better at teaching kids to read. That's where you see the one bright spot in the NAEP in this national report card is in Louisiana, where they actually did implement a back to basics on both phonics and math skills for students. And it turns out you can make progress that way by doing a science-based, actually effective reading program. But in my personal experience, I took my kids off of Zoom school. They were 6 and 4. And I was like, I'm not putting on Zoom all day. And I only read to them and had them read to me for the end of that school year. And both of them learned to read. And since then, they have been reading to learn voraciously. So it really makes a huge difference. It seems too simple to work, and yet it works.
Oh, it does work. My grandkids are the age of your kids, and they were blessed to be deployed in England during the year of COVID shutdown. And England went to school, so they can read. And they've always been readers anyway, because the parents are readers and parents who read to their children. And now, let's do Mary Catherine Ham addresses every school board in America, every public school board in America. What do you say with your 3 minutes, Mary Catherine Ham, to every school board in America?
I say, particularly to those that closed down, because there were ones that were better behaved and opened more quickly. I say to them, stop doing nonsense and start doing basics. That is what taxpayers want. That's what they deserve. Use phonics, use basic math. Please get your students on a track of doing that instead of gender studies. And I know that the left tells you that all of these things don't take away from the mission, but we got finite time in school, my friends, and we got finite time to come back from this. And you have been wasting it and wasting money and wasting people and hires on DEI and gender ideology when you need to be teaching phonics. And it is totally out of line, and it hurts the least among these the worst. The data shows that those who were more far behind during 2020 and already had issues are the ones who have not been able to catch up. The top 10% does okay. They sort of hang in there. They get private tutors in 2020 and they do all those things. The other folks were not served. You need to be serving them. That's what the taxpayer dollars are for.
Okay, now Hugh Hewitt comes up behind Mary Catherine Ham and says, and don't do anything else until you fix this. So I don't want anybody, obviously we need janitors and we need coaches because kids have got to run around and play sports. But we don't need people in the front office. We don't need curriculum specialists. We need teachers who are teaching to read, and we got to group kids by their ability so that they don't feel shamed and embarrassed because of the mistakes we made, but they have to read. And
they do.
They need to go to school year round. That's the one that's going to break the back of some teachers' unions. They got to take 3 weeks off 4 times a year, but they got to go year round. Am I?
No, they're asking for 4-day weeks around here. That's what they want. So
I must say, I do not know how we have one teacher in service day anywhere in America. A weather day may be acceptable if it's, the great blizzard of 2025. But how do they continue on like this, Mary Catherine?
Well, I think one of the things they did, unfortunately, in 2020, and the NAEP is the exception to this, is in a lot of districts they removed the normal testing data so that you could do oranges to oranges post-pandemic, and they sort of obscured the data because they knew they had messed this up and they didn't want us finding out how bad it was. I'm thankful for the national report card because it shows us what's actually happening. But a lot of these folks really thought that doing the other nonsense was enough to get them by and to excuse the fact that they had failed on academics. That's what they think. One of our school board members in my district was so happy in January of 2021 that they had gotten electric school buses. He had an electric school bus fleet. There were no children on those buses because there were no schools open. But he was really, really proud, and he still talks about it. And now they have a bunch more electric buses and a bunch of kids that can't read.
Mary Catherine, the Getting Hammered is always good, but that episode was superb. Thank you for your vigilance and your articulate expression of what has to happen if teachers really care about their kids. They will demand that from their principals and their school boards and their superintendents. Thank you, Mary Catherine Ham. Getting Hammered.
Thank you.
Available wherever podcasts are made available. John Podhoretz is coming up the top of the next hour, and I'm going to cut up shortly President Trump's comments on girls' sports and spaces that he just made. We'll bring that to you. Let me begin this segment, though, by reminding you of our sponsor, Conservatives for Healthcare, for lower healthcare costs. They have the website, pharmawindfall.com. and I support conservatives for lower health care costs because they're market-driven. They are absolutely opposed to big pharma handouts. I love what big pharma creates. I believe they do an immense amount of good for everyone out there who uses every new drug. And I don't know who invented albuterol, but I need that occasionally, and I'm very glad they did. And I do not know what the country and the world would be without big pharma. But I also don't like their lobbyists, because their lobbyists want to do more than just get paid for a product that they invented during its patented protection period. They want to extend those patents by manipulating things. There's a whole bunch of tricks. Sometimes they just want bags of money, like when they sold us out for Obamacare. So big pharma's lobbyists are the problem. And I want you to help conservatives for lower health care costs stop big pharma from getting another windfall. And I mean just bags of money, of the sort that Politico looted out of USAID. Go to pharmawindfall.com, times 1,000 probably. Go to pharmawindfall.com, find out how you can be part of the solution there. Now, President Trump just signed an EO. Here is cut number 18.
You've been waiting a long time for this. So have I. Actually, it was so ridiculous. But here we are. And this doesn't have to be long. It's just all about common sense. Doesn't have to be long. In a few moments, I'll sign a historic executive order to ban men from competing in women's sports. It's about time.
This is a 90-10 issue, by the way. Cut number 19.
Under the Trump administration, we will defend the proud tradition of female athletes, and we will not allow men to beat up, injure, and cheat our women and our girls. From now on, women's sports will be only for women.
He's got a whole bunch of women athletes behind him, women and girl athletes. Last cut, number 20.
But all of that ends today because with this executive order, the war on women's sports is over.
Oh, I'll tell you, gender is a suspect classification, and this executive order will be subject to intermediate scrutiny. Got to be an important governmental objective when you classify on the basis of gender. This is protecting women's sports, and the means and ends must be proportionate, and they are. It just stops. It just stops. It's not about being anti-trans. It's about being pro-girl, pro-women, and safety. It's simple, and good for you, President Trump. Joined by John Podhoretz. He is the editor-in-chief of Commentary Magazine. He is the conductor of the Daily Symphony that is the Commentary podcast that occasionally has guest soloists, but mostly they've got the same band together every day, and it's really fabulous today about Gaza. John, I do have to ask at the beginning, you haven't received any USAID money, have you, at Commentary? Because I really couldn't have you on if you were a voice of the government.
Tragically, no. I would love $38 million, and I have a nonprofit. I could really use $38 million, and we call it Commentary Pro, according to which we would basically sell commentary, but you would pay, I don't know, $1,000 a month, which I gather people are paying for Politico Pro, which is Politico, but for $1,000
I got to
a month.
tell you,
Listen,
it's
nice work if you can get it. If you
It's the biggest scandal in
it's
journalism.
not scandal in journalism. It's not scandal. It's a scandal in government. Like, I'm sorry, I was unaware of the fact that government agencies had a budget to subscribe to $1,000, $1,500, $200,000 a year in subscriptions. I know the lobbyists do it. I know that people who have business before the government need reporting about what's going on in the innards of the government. That's what those markets are for. I just didn't know the government was paying for reporting on the government that is being sold to people outside the government for the purposes of lobbying the government. I really feel like a sucker, Hugh. You and I are we've gone the wrong way with our profession here. Who knew how easy it would be to make $38 million? Who knew?
I'm completely with you. I'm thinking, why didn't I think of that? All right, John, number 2.
Yeah.
Will I like Paradise? I like James Marsden in Jury Duty. I heard your
Okay, here's the thing about Paradise. It has a really good pilot. I just watched the subsequent 3 episodes.
Oh no.
Yeah.
No, okay.
Oh boy.
Off the list. Now to the serious stuff.
Not good.
I spent.
You know, I recommended it based on the pilot. You know, sometimes you should keep your powder dry. Is all I got to say about this Hulu show. Keep your powder dry, or spend your time on something else. That's my.
Seth Mandel once recommended Tires or Tire Shop, and I had my wife watch it, and she's still not talking to me. So I am careful.
But that
about
guy,
it.
at least the guy who is the star of Tires, Shane Gillis, is somebody who you would find politically simpatico. I doubt that would be the
I
case
laughed a lot. I think it's a man's
Paradise.
show.
Okay,
I don't think it's a women's show. All right,
There
John,
you go.
serious
Fair
stuff.
enough. Yes.
I began the broadcast today by saying, go to the commentary podcast, listen to it. Here's some context. Gaza is 90,000 acres. Disney World is 25,000 acres. The Woodlands in Texas is 28,000 acres. The Villages is 35,000 acres. And the Irvine Ranch is bigger than Gaza. It's 100,000 acres. So it's possible actually to develop and master plan 100,000 acres. But the first step, and I want you to do a thought experiment with me. Let's say that the autocrat who runs Egypt, General Sisi, says, I'll take 1.8 million of the Gazans for 5 to 10 years if King Abdullah takes the rest. And they both agree to give him purple passports, they're gone. So we get the Gazans to go on a long vacation, and we pay for that. After that happens, what would you do next? Because I don't think the next step is very clear to me.
I'm not even sure any of that is clear to me either. I mean, we're not even quite, as we're speaking, I think we're 23 hours from the moment at which Donald Trump said we're going to clean up, and we're going to run Gaza. This is I would say earthquake is not the right word for it. A tsunami is not. Those are destructive. This is sort of constructive, but it is. We have shot off into some new stratosphere that I don't entirely understand, and so I don't even know how we get to the point at which. I know Trump said, I think they'll do it. They're not going to do it. They're going to do whatever they can not to take the Gazans. Would you take the Gazans? I certainly wouldn't take the Gazans.
No, the last time that the Palestinian activists were in Jordan, they tried to kill King Abdullah's father repeatedly.
Right, and they were kicked out. There was a gigantic forced population transfer of Palestinians out of Jordan in 1972 or 1970, something like that. Of course, Palestinians then occupied southern Lebanon and were kicked out of southern Lebanon in large numbers in 1982, 83. And so they are not a welcome population as en masse. And so this is the hardest lift for Trump. I mean, it's not a hard lift to take bulldozers and go through Jabalia and Khan Yunis and stuff like that and clear out the rubble. That's not the hard lift. I mean, you need to have, experts in removing unexploded ordnance and stuff like that. But you can do that, and we've seen these giant bulldozers, and you can do that too. And yeah, it's a large swath of land, but all of Germany was blasted and wasted after 1945 and was largely reconstructed by 1965. So and that was before modern construction techniques and stuff like that. So I that's not the issue for me. The issue for me is what are the next steps to create the conditions under which Trump's plan could happen. Now so if we pull back and say, okay, there's a logistical problem here with doing this. The question is, are we even going to get there? And the issue is whether what Trump has done here is just say, the past sclerosis is over. We have flushed the system clean. We're starting new, and we are starting new, and everything is on the table. Gaza emptied and rebuilt is on the table. Hamas gone is on the table. Everything is on the table. We are not the Biden administration. We are not the Obama administration. We're not even necessarily the first Trump administration, though we're building on some of the changes of the first Trump administration. We are not going to follow the rules of the last 60 years in the Middle East. And what follows from that could be 100 different things that aren't even Gaza. That, it's all you're doing here is opening. People are calling it opening the Pandora's box. which of course means terrible things, right? If you open Pandora's box. But what if you're opening a different kind of box? What if you're opening like a Christmas morning box? What if you're opening a box that,
a treasure chest at the bottom of the ocean?
A treasure chest. Or just, something that leads forward to a different future and is not, as I say, is not the sclerosis of the present.
No,
That's,
John,
I think, where we are here and why this is so revolutionary.
I'm always careful to say I think Trump was thinking this because I've interviewed him 30 times on the air and I'm never sure what he's thinking. But I think he was speaking with the press in the presence of Benjamin Netanyahu, but he was talking to President Sisi of Egypt and King Abdullah of Jordan. And what the message was, we're not doing it the way you want us to do it, with this rubble in place and letting them live there and the hostages in the tunnels and the terrorists killing them. We're not doing that. You have to be part of the solution. Is that the best possible interpretation of what he was doing?
Yeah, well, I think there are two. There's that, and then there is also the message to Qatar. Qatar being the actual Qatar, the actual country aside from Iran that is the banker, the financier, the home away from home for Hamas, and our version of its interlocutor in these negotiations is Qatar. And I think the answer here is, we have no permanent connection to anything that has come before us here.
Yep.
This is day one. January 20th is day one. Here's what we face. Hamas is almost destroyed, but not completely destroyed. Israel is our friend. We're on our friend's side. We don't want Iran to get a bomb. We don't want any more terrorism. Okay, you guys, how about you guys? What do you guys have to say?
Douglas Murray wrote yesterday in the New York Post, so I'm sure you read it. You've worked with the Post for years. He said, first you have to win the war before you do the peace. And the war's not over. Hamas is badly damaged and wounded, but they have hostages and they have tunnels. I was thinking that when I stipulated, okay, a temporary population transfer is possible, that you would say, but you got to kill Hamas because they're not going anywhere.
Well,
that to me is the first step.
You have now, yes, right. Okay, so as Matt Condé said on our show this morning, as Condé
you
said
muted
this
yourself,
morning,
John. Okay, you're back.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, keep going.
Okay. The point is, this is phase 2. Like, this is phase 3. The hostage deal has 3 phases. This is, as my sister Ruthie Bloom said, this is the day after plan. This is what happens after the war is over. The war has to be won, and then the day after plan will take effect. And if the day after plan is raise Gaza, clear it, and rebuild it, that's one thing. But yeah, the war has to be won. And what has Trump done? He has sent Israel $1 billion worth of armaments in the last 12 days.
Ruthie did say that when she was on the program 2 weeks ago. This is phase 1. What do you think is the best case here?
The best case is that Israel gets the hostages out, and that the backers of Hamas decide that their backing is now useless, that they have backed losers, and that it's open season. Either they say to them, come out of the tunnels and we'll find you a hole to hide in where the Israelis can't kill you the way you have been hiding in a hole in Gaza, somewhere else. And then Israel will simply take control of the territory militarily. That's the best case scenario. And that Israel doesn't have to then go fighting door to door or in the tunnels or anything like that to finally extirpate the rest of Hamas. Hamas has no future. It has no purpose. It has no way of going forward. And it does have this delusion that it can control the Gazan population in the north. The Gazan population in the north, which we've seen surrounding the hostages as they leave, is clearly still in Hamas's thrall. But Hamas without international support and backing isn't Hamas at all. There is no money. There's no nothing. And Israel can, if phase 2 doesn't go anywhere, or if they don't get any more hostages out after the 38 that are supposed to be out, those trucks that are driving in, There are no more trucks, no food, no nothing. Israel's role in this bizarre way to allow for the comfort, food, and feeding of the population of its enemy, something that has never been seen before in the history of mankind, will come to an end. That's, I think, where we are. And so I think the best case scenario is that Hamas gives up the ghost. That what happened this week, together with everything else, is Hamas realizes that it's done, it's toast, and that it's whoever is left, like, skulks off somewhere to be hunted for the rest of their lives, by the way. By
Mohammed Sinwar gets together however many senior operators there are and leads the night train out of Gaza to Turkey or wherever they go, and they will be hunted because they killed those people on 10/7, but at least they get a running start. I think that's the best case.
And the worst case is the hostages are all killed. I mean, that's the worst case, is that Hamas is Macbeth at the end of Macbeth and says, okay, well, I'm toast anyway, so I'm going to fight to the death in my last couple of minutes. I'm gonna spend all my artillery. I'm going to spend what I have and let it go. And that's the worst case scenario.
It's chilling, but it's realistic.
That's the worst case scenario in humanitarian terms. It's not the worst case. It's one or the other, right? They're not. Israel will start dropping. Israel will start dropping the 2,000-pound bombs.
Yep,
in March if this goes on.
John Podhoretz, Commentary Podcast, Commentary Magazine. Thank you, John. It's a symphony every morning. He's the conductor. You ought to be listening like I do when I'm out exercising or watching on YouTube. But go watch, subscribe, and like wherever podcasts are available. Former Congressman John Campbell joins me. He was for many years on the House Financial Services Committee. And the reason I'm really glad to talk to him today, and his X handle is Look Through Chaos. Look, THRU Chaos. I think they learned to spell at USC that way. And he is an accountant, though he is a USC accountant, so I don't know how much good that is. But John Campbell, what do you make of what Doge is doing, and especially what they discovered at USAID?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely wonderful, Hugh, what they are doing. Amazing what they are doing. But in some respects, not that surprising. I mean, we all knew there was tons of waste in this stuff. We all knew there was abuse. We all knew that. I'm not sure we knew the extent to what's there, but this stuff is truly, like I heard you talking earlier about the money to Politico and supposedly money to the New York Times as well.
I got to admit, I'm gobsmacked. If there's ever a definition of gobsmacked, it's my reaction when Dwayne told me that Politico got $35 million this year from the government.
And by the way, I heard you say that, and I did some math on that, because some of the people on X that are defending this are saying, well, Politico has magnificent, super high-end subscriptions to provide you with all this information you can't get anywhere else, and they're $10,000 a year. So you take that 34 million divided by that $10,000, that's still 3,400 different subscriptions that USAID, AID, or the government, whatever, bought. But the thing about this, to me, Hugh, that's so terribly corrupt, and we can use Politico as an example, but it's not the only example. What the whole Democratic Party is built around now is, whether it's USAID stuff, whether it's the homeless industrial complex, whether it's money going to news organizations like this, the government gives this organization money. They use it to pay themselves. Then those people go back and make campaign contributions to the Democrats, who keep funding the programs that pay them. It's a corrupt circle.
Oh, it's so corrupt.
Like this.
For years I've said.
And low-income housing, you did a lot of development stuff. You know how bad low-income housing is.
Oh, it's terrible.
Terrible. It's all
But
corrupt.
I
It's
mostly
all
get mad at NPR and PBS because I got to make my bones to keep this show going, right? We got to sell ads. The only people in the world in broadcast who don't have to sell ads. PBS gets to beg for money. NPR just gets money from their listeners and the government, and it's not fair. But but it was public. It was public. This is corruption because it was hidden. That's what makes it toxic.
Right. And that's another thing. Again, you see on X all the people attacking Elon. You see all the Democrats. They're hysterical Democrats. I mean, Chuck Schumer, my gosh, he really needs to be. He is past his sell-by date. But they're yelling about nobody elected Elon Musk and so forth. But it was very clear what Elon Musk was going to do, what Doge was going to do before the election. People voted for Donald Trump knowing this was going to happen.
By the way, I want to add, you're a Churchill guy. Harry Hopkins was a special government employee who decided matters of life and death for FDR because FDR couldn't travel easily, so he would send Harry Hopkins to sit down with Churchill and tell him whether or not the United Kingdom, special government employees are a fact of American history.
Correct. Not unprecedented at all. But what is the situation is it's not hidden. You know what he's doing. You knew he was going to do it before you voted for him. He's now doing it. He's being very transparent about what he's doing. What about George Soros? What do we know about George Soros? We know how influential he is. We know he was involved. We know he got a presidential medal, or his son Alex, or whatever. They'd all done. We know they sent a ton of money to Democratic things, but it's all hidden. It's all when you vote for a Democrat, you're voting for George Soros. But do you know what George Soros is doing? Is he transparent? Is he clear? Do you know what his objectives are? No, you don't. You don't. And that's a significant difference.
Now, you are a constitutionalist, though, like me. You believe in the rule of law. Trump is pressing his Article 2 authority up against the wall. He's going to run into the Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974. He's going to run into the fact that Congress has appropriated money, and some presidents signed that bill, and the money's got to be spent. What do you think the court's going to do when it gets the question of, do we have a unitary executive or don't we?
Yeah, you're the legal guy. I'll leave that to you. But what I do want to say is, you brought up, it's from the Budget Control Act of 1974, which back then, it's something I'll be writing about and look through the chaos.com fairly soon. Almost all of our fiscal, our budget, everything else in the federal government right now is controlled by the language of that act in 1974. That act was passed. Richard Nixon had decided there was a lot of waste and abuse in government, and he was going to go root it out. And he wanted to cut spending, and the Democrats didn't want him to. And so Watergate came along. He was weakened. Obviously, 1974 is when he resigned. When he stepped down. But so the Democrats passed this bill, which had they passed it in 1972, he vetoes it. They couldn't pass it over his veto. But they passed it in 1974. He was trying to hold on, and he signed it. And it was a terrible thing to do because it created a structure by which spending, it's much easier to spend than it is to cut. When I was in when I first went to Congress in 2005, 20 years ago, one of the first things a bunch of us wanted to do was repeal that 1974 act and replace it. First of all, it has a mechanism by which a budget gets passed. How long has it been since 1974? What is it? It's like
52 years, 51 years.
51 years. In 51 years, I believe it has only operated the way it is supposed to. 12 appropriations bills passed by both houses of Congress, signed by the president, blah, 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 3 times in 50 years. That's not a very good. You're not even going to play for the Cleveland Indians with that kind of.
Oh, brutal.
So anyway, it's terrible. It needs to be repealed. So I don't know what the courts will do with this, but that's a bad law.
It's like the Inspector General law. And I have told my law students, I've discussed with their lawyers, Trump's going to throw everything at the wall to assert Article 2 authority, that's the executive, against Article 1 powers to see what sticks. And we have an originalist court, which he built in Term 1. I'm not pessimistic about some of this being legal, John. I'm not. I think it's common sense.
I would think so. I would think so. We know that the president can and shouldn't spend money that isn't authorized by Congress. But I don't know that he has to spend every dollar that is authorized.
And I want you to stay with me through the break if you can, because I want to tell you a little bit about what I discovered when I ran an agency, because I'll set the table and then you comment on it. At the end of the year, if you've got money lying around because you didn't spend it, you buy stuff. You buy desks and chairs.
Absolutely.
You give out bonuses. You spend it because you cannot not spend it under that stupid law.
And because if you don't spend it, they will then they'll say, oh, look, this person didn't spend his budget, and so this is where you can get cut. So that's the other thing. I heard that in Congress all the time. If
All
we
right,
don't
stand by,
spend
John.
it,
I'm coming right back. You need to go to lookthroughthechaos.com. John has a podcast. He's also a guest on Dwayne's World often, and mostly you want his newsletter because he's a pretty good writer for being a USC grad and a UCLA grad. I'm going to talk to him about what the president said yesterday about the scam tram, because John's responsible for the scam tram in the Central Valley. He was in the California legislature when that got started, so we can blame him. John Campbell, who is responsible for that scam tram in the Central Valley. I say that because before he was a congressman, he was a state senator, an important one. Before that, he was a state representative and an important one. And that's an old project, and I blame you, John. You have 4 minutes to defend yourself. You're muted. You're muted. See?
What? I didn't mute it.
Now
I
you're
didn't do
on.
anything. Okay. Am I there?
Yes, you are. I think.
Okay. All right. First of all, that's been going on for 20 years. It was going on when I was in the legislature. I was against it then, but I have to tell you a story because I think you'll enjoy this. So I'm elected to Congress in 2005. We were in the majority for a little bit, but in 2010 we got the majority back, and there was federal money that had been approved to go to this train in California. Myself and a couple of my fellow Republican members of Congress went in to the chairman of the Transportation Committee, and we said, we don't want any federal money for the stupid train in California, because all it will do is match California taxpayers' money, and we'll be wasting California taxpayers' money because the whole thing is complete boondoggle and total waste. I'll never forget, he was from Florida, and he looked at me and he said, wait a minute, I have a representative from California that I'm about to send $3 million or whatever it was to California telling me you don't want the money. I said, look, I don't care if you throw it in the Pacific Ocean, you can throw it in the Atlantic Ocean if you want to. I said, but if you put that $3 million in, they'll match it with $3 million of California taxpayer money, and that'll be wasted too. So I'll be saving the taxpayers of California $3 million by doing this. Take it out. He said, okay, and he took it out. But I mean, that's how long that's 2010. It's 15 years ago. That's how long this stupid thing has been going on.
Did you hear the president's remarks yesterday about it?
Oh, wait, I didn't. No, I didn't.
Okay, I'm going to play it for you, and then I'm going to keep you into the next segment. Here's Donald Trump yesterday on the scam tram in California.
The real question is, how much of a kickback has there been? And one of the things I want to investigate rapidly, because I've never seen anything to this extent, the train that's being built between Los Angeles and San Francisco is the worst managed project I think I've ever seen, and I've seen some of the worst. Billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars over budget. In fact, I read where you could take every single person that was going to go on the train and get the finest limousine service in the world and take them back and forth with limousines, and you'd have hundreds of billions of dollars left over. It is the worst thing, and we're going to start an investigation in that because it's not possible. I built for a living, and I built on time, on budget. It's impossible that something could cost that much. And now it's not even going to San Francisco, and it's not going to Los Angeles. They made it much shorter. So now
okay, John Campbell, stand by. I'm coming back. I'm from break. And then I want you to comment on the president's comments yesterday. You're responsible for this. They should just put John Campbell on the train.
Well, I get something named after me.
I played former Congressman John Campbell, the audio of the president yesterday talking about what is widely known in California to be the Campbell-Brown-Newsom Express. That's what it's like, the Acela Corridor. It's the John Campbell, Jerry Brown, Gavin Newsom Express. And he was pretty critical of it, John. And I hope he does an investigation. And I hope he does the Great Park at the same time, because that's the only other thing that's as stupid an expenditure of money in my life I've ever seen.
You know, I didn't do earmarks, and so therefore I didn't get a bridge or a road or, a park or anything named after me. So, I guess you might as well do that, get me something named after me. But yeah, this thing, it's been going on for 20-something years, and they always have a number, and then the number goes up, and then it goes up again, and then it goes up again, and not by inflation, by way, way more than that. And my favorite was the last I saw, and in that clip you played from the president, he said it's not even going from Los Angeles to San Francisco anymore. Well, the initial part of it is supposed to go from outside Modesto, not Modesto, outside Modesto, to outside Fresno, not Fresno. Now, for those of you who don't know California, Fresno and Modesto are not huge towns. And this is not, and if you put it between Fresno and Modesto, nobody would take it anyway because it'll be cheaper.
No one is going to get on that train ever.
No one.
It's never, ever going to go anywhere.
And one of the things about trains, let me just say, I like trains. I think they're fun. I've been on them in Europe. I've been on Amtrak, whatever. I like trains. They're fun. There's only one train, passenger train, not cargo
freight.
Trains make money. Not freight. Those make money. There's only one passenger train in the world that makes money without government subsidy. Do you know what that is?
Japan?
No, those are all subsidized.
Oh.
No, it is very near me here. It is the Grand Canyon
Is the
Railroad.
Acela?
No, the Grand Canyon Railroad.
Oh!
The railroad takes you to the Grand Canyon. There's no government subsidies. You pay to get on it. It makes money. Okay? That is the only profitable passenger train in the world. All the rest of them are government subsidized. Why? We're not subsidizing
Social
people in cars and
engineering.
trucks. In fact,
It's
they pay a
social
tax,
engineering. It's just social engineering.
It's just if it makes sense, then people should be willing to pay what it costs to go on it. If they won't pay what it costs to go on it, then it doesn't make sense.
John, I hope you are doing Dwayne's World this week because I'd like you to explain and confess complicity in the Campbell-Brown-Newsom train, otherwise known as the CBN is what its short name is, the CBN train. It's now the CBN train forever, and there it is.
Why do I do this show?
I don't know, but I'm glad you're here because I've exposed that. Politico and John Campbell going down on the same day. The CBN train. Thank you, Congressman. Now, I want to play for you again Donald Trump signing cut number 18. All the women athletes are behind Donald Trump. Let's play cut number 18.
You've been waiting a long time for this. So have I. Actually, it was so ridiculous. But here we are. And this doesn't have to be long. It's just all about common sense. Doesn't have to be long. In a few moments, I'll sign a historic executive order to ban men from competing in women's sports. It's about time.
One more cut 19.
Under the Trump administration, we will defend the proud tradition of female athletes, and we will not allow men to beat up, injure, and cheat our women and our girls. From now on, women's sports will be only for women.
I got to say, Selena Zito's coming up. This is a 90-10 issue. 90% of Americans agree with this, maybe 95, and it's not anti-trans. It's pro-girl, pro-women.
We have to worry about that.
Mary Margaret Olahan took that picture of Donald Trump signing the executive order preserving women's spaces in sports from men and boys. I'm joined by Selena Zito. Selena, what'd you make of that video by Mary Margaret Olahan? I can't say her name.
One of those frustrating things to me is that people didn't understand how much that meant to suburban moms across the Midwest, throughout Appalachia, across Pennsylvania, that and also RFK's discussion about healthy eating. This is really important to parents. There are parents out there that sit on the sidelines and on soccer fields every weekend. They take their kids to practice, their daughters, and the idea that they would be competing with boys and against boys on the soccer field, on the lacrosse field, at a swim meet was so frustrating for them because they knew that would stop their ability to be able to apply and go for college scholarships for athletics. Look, my daughter went to college on her soccer foot. I don't think I'd been able to afford it had she not. So I understood it when moms talked about it.
And I got to say, I want to widen the scope out. As a dad, I went to hundreds of swim meets, and my daughter played softball and my daughter played soccer, and I was there at all of them. And then she ran track and I ran at all of them. She didn't play water polo like my boys, and thank goodness boys aren't allowed to play girls water polo, because that's a really rough sport and it's grabby.
Yeah.
I mean, it's wicked tough underneath the water. But what I don't understand, Selena, it's a 90-10 issue. It's not anti-trans to say girls sports and girls spaces, women's sports and women's spaces are for girls and women. It's nature's law and law of nature and nature's God. It's not really controversial.
It isn't controversial. And there were so many Democrats or people that were hesitant about voting for Trump who looked at this issue and then other issues that the Democrats were embracing that they felt was way out there, like way out in left field. And they couldn't understand why they were so strident and made these issues so important over common sense ways of looking at it's women's sports. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that Title IX happened, right?
50 years ago, 1972, Richard Nixon signed it. We had a big celebration at the Nixon Library. But Selena, here's what I want to get to. Yesterday, I listened to a podcast. I think it was the National Review podcast, the editors, and they said the only common sense Democrats or the counter revolution against crazy is happening in Pennsylvania with Josh Shapiro and John Fetterman. And so you're at ground zero again. And interesting, it's an old blue state that became a red state, and Ohio went ruby red, but Pennsylvania's just kind of light red. Can Fetterman and Shapiro save the Democratic Party?
No, because neither of them would be allowed to make it through a primary process if they were to seek a presidential, right? So at that level, yeah, it's really challenging for me to think that could happen. Incidentally, I just interviewed both of them in the past 2 days, along with J.D. Vance, and you're right. While Shapiro and Fetterman have vastly different ways of approaching politics and often differ on some things, they both are very pragmatic, very common sense, and they offer today's young Democrats a glimpse into what the glory days of the Democratic Party look like.
You know, I think actually, and I'm not pandering to Josh Shapiro. He's hard to book on this show, but I'll try and get him back. And I actually think if he throws his hat in after a big re-election win, if he gets a big re-election win, Democrats have to look hard at him like they looked hard at Bill Clinton in 1992, or they're going to get wiped out again. If they go to the left with AOC, they're going to get J.D. Vance or whoever the nominee is going to crush AOC, because that's not 90% of the country.
I don't disagree with you. However, if you turn on social media or you turn on the local or the various cable news networks, there is zero evidence that the Democrats have understood why they lost and have understood a message to take forward. And that's their challenge, and that's their problem. You look at yesterday, I think it was yesterday, Chuck Schumer was doing some sort of weird chant. There are these protests in the streets about illegals being deported, in particular a focus on criminal illegals, and they're not understanding that these are the reasons you lost, because your message was not cohesive with the rest of the country, including your people within your own party.
Yeah, if you're more concerned about keeping your interest group on top of a minority party than you are in expanding a minority party to a majority party, that's the way you act. Last question, Selena. I'm just gathering up reactions to the Politico story. $35 million this year. There's another story that the New York Times got millions. I'm actually shocked. That's the biggest journalism scandal, I think, of my lifetime, if it turns out to be true.
So I was on the road all day today, interviewed DeWine and Senator Marino. So I really have not taken a look at it. I think that, what has to be looked at, I suspect, is this, are these subscriptions. A lot of these congressional offices, I mean, a million years I worked in a congressional office, and they did have subscriptions. So I think that it needs to be more than just a line item. I think that the first thing to do is to take a look at that and what was, were employees subscribing to Politico? I know Politico Pro is very expensive.
Yeah, I don't buy that. But I'll tell you, in my first contract with Salem, way back in 2000, there was a line item in there that they had to pay for the hotline because it was $4,000 a year. But in the day before social media, you needed the hotline.
Right.
Right. But that's not now. Nobody needs Politico Pro. Nobody. Zero. Selena Zito, always good to see you. Follow her on X at Zito Selena. Get everything she does at selenazito.com. Markets have closed today, so I bring you the market report, which as always, sponsored by AmericanFederal.com. My friend Nick Grovich is at the helm at American Federal, where he has been for more than 40 years. He and his team of professionals buy and sell gold and silver. If you want to buy gold today, you call 1-800-221-7694, 1-800-221-7694, or you go to AmericanFederal.com. They're transparent. They're quick. I bought gold from Nick in January, as is my habit in January to buy gold. I'm a dollar cost average guy. Over the years, it works. If you buy it same date every year, or you buy every quarter or every month, whatever you do, if you do it the same schedule, market ups and downs don't bother you. Now, today, the Dow went up 0.71%. Good day on the Dow. The S&P went up 0.39%. Good day on the S&P. NASDAQ went up 0.19%. Pretty good day on the NASDAQ. It's not red. The 10-year Treasury went up a little bit. Not good news for inflation. It's at 4.427. And gold went up again. $2,883.50. I feel obliged to tell you, gold doesn't always go up. It just seems that way if you started listening to the show since I moved to the afternoons earlier this year. And I'm glad I bought gold when I did, but it's not because I have a strategy. I don't time the market. I can't. No one can. People buy gold because gold diversifies portfolio. People sell gold because they need money, or they just got old jewelry that they don't want to wear anymore, or they inherited a coin collection from grandma or grandpa or something. They call up Nick Grovich. And Nick will talk to you forever about your coins if they're interesting. But mostly, he'll take your order for, or his team will take your order for, how much gold? What do you want? Here's the commission. The more gold you buy, the less the commission. We don't pay you the market for the gold you send in because we got to make money too. It's all very transparent. It's very market-oriented. 1-800-221-7694. Now, Carolyn Leavitt was back in front of the White House today, and she confirmed a little bit about Politico, cut number 11.
So upon coming out here to the briefing room, I was made aware of the funding from USAID to media outlets, including Politico, who I know has a seat in this room. And I can confirm that the more than $8 million taxpayer dollars that have gone to essentially subsidizing subscriptions to Politico on the American taxpayers' dime will no longer be happening. The DOJ team is working on canceling those payments now. Again, this is a whole of government effort to ensure that we are going line by line when it comes to the federal government's books. And this president and his team are making decisions across the board on, do these receipts serve the interests of the American people?
And
is this a good use of the...
Congress does appropriate money for AID. Did it appropriate money to go to Politico? No. So there's a big gap between what the Congress says spend money on and what the executive branch spent money on, and that's the gap that DOJ, Musk, and Trump are operating in.
I do see a long-term ownership position, and I see it bringing great stability to that part of the Middle East and maybe the entire Middle East.
Morning glory and evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt in Studio West. That was President Trump at yesterday's press conference with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Joining me to discuss that and other topics that are breaking loose today is Brett Baier. He is host of Special Report every night, Monday through Friday, from 6 to 7 on the Fox News Channel Eastern. Brett brings you the news, just straight up news, old-fashioned, old school, Brett, when the president said that yesterday, I've spent a lot of time today talking about this. What was your reaction?
Holy cow. I think that was probably first reaction. I think that, it was a surprising thing. It was, I think walked back a little bit today as far as, U.S. troops and when it happens and more of a nuanced ownership as far as being a part of the solution in Gaza. But when it was said, how it was said next to Bibi Netanyahu was a big moment.
Big moment. I have been educating the audience that in Gaza is 90,000 acres, and that's a lot of land. The Disney World's 25,000 acres. The Woodlands is 28,000 acres. The Villages in Florida, 35,000 acres. And the Irvine Ranch out here in Southern California is 100,000 acres. So it's manageable. You could do a master plan community, but there are two problems. Not problems, there are two facts on the ground. One is 2 million Gazans with nowhere to go. And the other is Hamas is a terrorist organization that's in the tunnels with hostages. Donald Trump just sort of jumped over that. What do you think he was trying? Who was he talking to there? I have a theory, but what's your theory?
I think he was talking to the Saudis. And I think he was saying, listen, if you guys don't step up with a solution here, this could be my solution. I actually don't think Donald Trump is in the business of occupying any area in the Middle East. I mean, he ran against George W. Bush's, efforts in Iraq and has talked about America first, and we don't need to be the policeman of the world. This is a different sounding Donald Trump, but I actually think the message was more of a negotiating message if I was to read between the lines.
Yeah, I try to be very humble about interpreting the president's remarks because he's thinking his own thoughts, and I've talked to him on the air about Gaza before, and he does think it's prime real estate. I thought he might be messaging the ruler of Egypt, President Sisi, and the king of Jordan, King Abdullah, about, look, Egypt, you got 112 million people, take some of these, and Jordan, you've got 11 million people, take some more so that we can at least begin the rebuild, because no one can live there. I haven't been to Gaza. I've never been to Gaza, but I can't imagine 2 million people surviving there. Can you?
I have been to Gaza, but I haven't been after it's been bombed for months on end with, live munitions still on the ground. I mean, to hear the Israelis and Steve Witkoff and others talk about it, it's a 10 to 15-year project. That said, part of the message was to what I'm saying, the Saudis, is that they run point, but Egypt and Jordan would be the facilitators of taking in Palestinians from Gaza 100%. But I have a feeling that MBS, the Crown Prince, wants to be in the center of the action on big negotiations. And so that's maybe where this ends up.
Yeah, the Crown Prince has got a big plan for Saudi Arabia that involves Israeli tech eventually. The UAE opened the door. And I think you're right. And I think that's just the kickoff. It's sort of like when they cut the ribbon and you see the model and it's not really built and the land isn't cleared. I run by occasionally. There's a water project in Old Town Alexandria, south of Gravelly Port, past Reagan, that's been under construction for 8 years. It's a water project. I really think Gaza is going to take 30 years. Brett, I want to go to a delicate story for me and for you. I've had Politico guests for a long time. When they opened it, Mike Allen, Jim Vandehei, they did so on my show. Weekly guest for years, Olivia Beavers, who's been on the panel on Special Report with me, was until last month a Politico reporter. I'm kind of shocked that they took $35 million. That's the high end. We know at least $8 million. That's the low end in the last year from the federal government. What was your reaction to that, and does it change how you will treat Politico?
Yeah, we've had on again, off again with Politico. I think we're off again. I have to check, but I think it's surprising. I don't think it helps with trust, especially if you look at some of the angles that they were taking in heavy criticism of administration and federal government actions. and it comes on a day where you get CBS releasing the transcript of the Kamala Harris interview with 60 Minutes, and how it was kind of changed around to eliminate the word salad in the Bill Whitaker interview.
I haven't had a chance to watch that yet. I did post the link so people could. It's 53 minutes long. What's the news grab there? How do you lead with that tonight?
The news grab is it's clearly an effort to make her look better, and in the middle of a campaign, is that fair? The Trump campaign would argue it's not. It was a cleanup on aisle 4 of a really bad answer.
Wow.
And they just got busted because one show accidentally ran the full version, and another show chose to chop it up in much better looking pieces.
Wow. Okay. I doubt very much we would have an earthquake of measurable proportion if the Trump administration gave me or you $35 million with which to work. I just don't think that the shows would collapse, right? We would be run out of town. I await further developments. Let me ask you about the girls' sport executive order. And Mary Margaret Olahan, I believe is how you pronounce her name, from the Daily Caller, posted this video. It's really quite remarkable, of the little girls around the president's desk and the older girls and women athletes behind him. I don't see how this is other than a 90-10 issue, Brett Baier. What do you think?
I agree. I think if you look at polls before Election Day, that's where it was. It was motivating for independents and suburban women and moms, and it was not even a political issue. It became, a social, cultural issue that was hurting young girls in sports, and it took off. So I do think it's a big deal. Of course, we're going to see lawsuits, and we'll see challenges, but I think, the president promised this and he delivered.
Yeah. Last political question has to do with the DNC elections, and they were pretty hard left. At the same time, you and I both try and bring on Democrats who want to talk about substance. Ro Khanna or Josh Shapiro or Chris Coons. There are a bunch of Democrats who will, I would call center-left Democrats that want. I don't think the DNC did them any favors. Do you?
I don't. I actually was kind of surprised that it went the way it did. And I still think they are a party in the wilderness trying to find some footing. I think, the president is giving them some things to grab onto. They're really into Elon Musk and what he's doing and how he's doing it with Doge. I think, the freeze gave them a little bump. But as far as, messaging across the board, haven't seen it yet.
Now, let's close on that. The Democrats are fighting against Elon Musk on every front until the numbers began to come out on USAID. I'm not in favor of laying off 10,000 federal employees with no notice, but that agency's a wreck, and they've been doing terrible things with our money. Do you think that gives a Captain America shield to Elon Musk for a while?
I do definitely with Republicans and independents. I think Democrats are jumping on the, Republicans argued for years that unelected bureaucrats were controlling money and policy in Washington. And here is an unelected person who is scrubbing and making decisions that Congress, feels like they should weigh in on. And I get it. And they have to articulate it better, because fighting all the waste, fraud, and abuse that he's finding and putting out publicly is pretty popular.
Yeah, if you can find a Democrat to say, we intended Politico to get $35 million and for the Peruvian comic book to be published, I'll watch that twice, Brett Baier, and I'll be
100%.
I'll be watching tonight 6 to 7, Monday through Friday special report with Brett Baier. Thank you, Brett. I don't want anyone to go anywhere. Stay right where you are. We got a lot of show left. Sarah Bedford is back after maternity leave, and she'll be joining me, and we'll talk more. I mean, people who live in the Beltway, and I do most of the year. I'm in California while I'm teaching, and the fetching Mrs. Hewitt needs her sunshine in the wintertime. But I'm just gobsmacked by the Politico story. What were they thinking? And I know a bunch of those people. I like a bunch of those people. They've done good work in the past, but they should just shutter themselves. They're not publicly traded, or their stock would have gone to the floor. Their credibility is shot, absolutely shot. It already was for the center and the right, but now it's destroyed. Michael Waltz is the National Security Advisor. The Green Beret, former congressman from Florida, was on with Maria Bartiromo this morning. I don't think I'm ever going to get him on because my son works for him, and I'd have to disclose that. And I disclose it every day, and it's got nothing to do with me. But Waltz used to be on once a week with us, but now I have to just borrow clips from everyone. But it was a good interview. Here's Michael Waltz this morning talking about reigniting American strength. Cut number 7.
Well, President Trump is determined to rebuild our great military. Secretary Hegstaff, as you can see, has it focused on lethality, winning wars, and hiring and recruiting the best of the best for our great military. That deterrent force has to be in place. But the real strength of the United States is our economy and in our markets. And that's why he's so determined with Governor Burgum, now Secretary Burgum as the energy czar, on using the strengths of the United States, our mining, our refining, our supply chains, our critical minerals. We have the energy, the food, the things that drive our economy right here in the Western Hemisphere. Secretary Rubio is reinvesting and reinvigorating America in the Western Hemisphere. Yep. Getting China out of Panama, and then you saw the tariffs go in place on China from President Trump this week. This is all, we are blitzing the zone, Maria, and reigniting American strength, and that starts with our economy. Yeah.
He went on to talk about ISIS. Cut number 8.
Well, Prime Minister Netanyahu, after my and Special Envoy Witkoff's meeting with him, announced another negotiating team, another round of negotiations, working with our partners, the Qataris, working with our partners, the Egyptians. At the end of the day, Hamas cannot be allowed to continue to terrorize the region. The American people need to think about Hamas right in the same sentence as Al-Qaeda and ISIS and all of the worst terrorist groups in the world. We wouldn't allow ISIS or Al-Qaeda to sit there right on our border and govern a space and attack us again. Hamas is saying right now as we speak, there will be more October 7th if they're allowed to survive. And we are completely aligned with our allies in Israel that Hamas cannot be allowed to do that ever again. That was Israel's 9/11. We haven't allowed another, neither should they, and we're aligned with helping them prevent it.
And then one more cut. Michael Waltz with Maria Bartiromo this morning about Iran and nuclear weapons. Cut number 9.
Well, it's going back to what worked in President Trump's first term. Their oil exports were nearly zero, 90% of which now go to China. Their currency was tanking. Their economy was cratering. What does that mean? That means they were literally too broke to fund terrorism around the region. Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and others. We saw that in the first term. And the President Trump is, what he did yesterday is going back to that, number one. And number two, we are completely aligned with Israel that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. All options are on the table in terms of how we get there. But one cannot imagine, Maria, if we've seen the death, terror, and destruction that Iran has wreaked upon the Middle East, imagine them doing it under the umbrella of a nuclear weapon, and imagine the reaction across the Middle East if Iran tests a nuke. Then you have Saudi, Turkey, UAE, and others that may want their own nuclear weapon, and we'd have a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. So when my fellow Americans say, why does this matter to us? That prospect should terrify the entire world. President Trump is determined to stop it and prevent that from happening.
I'm very glad to have him as the National Security Advisor because he's clear and concise, gets to the point, and answers the question. So does Caroline Leavitt from the front of the White House press room today, expanding on President Trump's comments about Gaza yesterday. Cut number 12.
On Gaza, the president has spent basically his entire public career criticizing foreign entanglements, nation building, sending American troops to fight abroad, particularly in the Middle East. This plan seems like it could ultimately involve all of those things. Can you explain this reversal and how building and owning Gaza squares with America First foreign policy?
I would reject the premise of your question that this forces the United States to be entangled in conflicts abroad. The president has not committed to putting boots on the ground in Gaza. He has also said that the United States is not going to pay for the rebuilding of Gaza. His administration is going to work with our partners in the region to reconstruct this region. And let me just take a step back here, because this is an out-of-the-box idea. That's who President Trump is. That's why the American people elected him. And his goal is lasting peace in the Middle East for all people in the region. And as I said in my opening remarks, we've had the same people pushing the same solutions to this problem for decades. And it's been made very clear to the president that the United States needs to be involved in this rebuilding effort to ensure stability in the region for all people. But that does not mean boots on the ground in Gaza. It does not mean American taxpayers will be funding this effort. It means Donald Trump, who is the best deal maker on the planet, is going to strike a deal with our partners in the region.
That's it. Cut one more cut from Caroline because she's so good. Cut 13.
Yesterday, as you all know, President Trump held his first foreign meeting at the White House with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And as the president said, the bonds of friendship and affection between the American and Israeli people have endured for generations and are absolutely unbreakable.
That now let's go to Dan
president is
Senor,
committed.
who's with Casey Hunt on CNN. Dan Senor, a frequent guest. He's the host of the Call Me Back podcast, cut number 15.
Look, I think that Israel has tried both in southern Lebanon and Gaza and the West Bank over the last number of decades to experiment with different approaches with getting out of these territories and letting local authorities effectively govern them. Right. So in the 1990s, Israel gradually withdrew from the West Bank. Obviously, it still has a security presence there, but it handed over governance to most of the West Bank to what has become the Palestinian Authority. In May of 2000, Israel unilaterally withdrew from southern Lebanon. Hezbollah gradually, as we know, as we've seen tragically in recent years, took over. And in 2005, Israel unilaterally withdrew from Gaza, hoping that the Palestinian Authority would be able to govern there. In each of those three places, Casey, Israel has effectively had to go back in, right? Israeli soldiers are dying in all of those areas Israel has withdrawn from. We've seen what's happened in Lebanon in recent years. We've seen what's happened in the West Bank. Even at this moment, there are Israeli operations in parts of the northern West Bank. And obviously, we saw October 7th in Gaza and what has followed. We are on a path right now in Gaza to just rinse and repeat to the same old scenario, which is to say, left to everyone's own devices, left on the trajectory that things are now on, Hamas is, as Israel has during the ceasefire, has been pulling back. Hamas is going to try and reassert control. The international community is going to help rebuild Gaza with Hamas there. So tell me exactly how that looks any different from what Israel and the Palestinian people got between 2005 when Israel withdrew and October 7th of 2023. We're on a similar trajectory. There are two options. Let that happen or have Israel reoccupy Gaza. Now, nobody wants Israel to reoccupy Gaza, including the majority of Israelis. So I think what President Trump is doing is throwing out other ideas. Do I think
He's right. Dan Senor usually is. That's why I listen to Call Me Back whenever I can. Sarah Bedford is inside the Beltway, where she works with the Washington Examiner as their investigations editor. Sarah has been gone for a while on maternity leave. She's back. Sarah, welcome. Great to have you back.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Now, Sarah, today is a great day to come back because there's some investigating to do about Politico. How are you going to go about that? Because we have friends, right? You and I have friends at Politico, and I hate to take the axe to them, but my goodness, $35 million from the federal government is the high number, $8 million is the low. What are you going to do with that?
Yeah, it's like the federal workers couldn't share passwords for these subscriptions. Millions of dollars had to go to paying for this. I think, you can look at this and say it's a trade publication. Maybe some of this information helps people do their jobs, but it's also to the average person a sort of symbol of the excessive government spending that DOJ and Republicans are now trying to crack down on. So even though in one sense, I can see why some of these government agencies subscribed to those trade publications. It's obviously something that the American people were voting against when they sided with Donald Trump and Republicans.
It is, to me, Sarah, deep insiderism. Now, I live in the Beltway most of the year, and I am subject to insiderism as well. They call it GOPE. But I get out in the winter to California to teach, and I go to Maine in the summer. I try and spend, at least 5 months out of the year outside of the Beltway, so I'm not absorbed in the cocoon that is the Beltway. This is a money recycling business. The federal government gets money from Congress. They give it to Politico. Politico covers the agencies that buy the subscriptions that then go to Congress and say, spend more money. And Congress, to your knowledge, I shouldn't presume facts not in evidence. To your knowledge, is there a line item in the USAID budget that directs them to spend money on Politico?
To my knowledge, no, that's not something that Congress appropriated, but obviously USAID was spending the money on this sort of thing. But, just the tiny peek we've gotten under the curtain of USAID and some of these other agencies has shown this sort of, like you mentioned, information loop that taxpayer dollars was going to fund that benefited the left. You also have censorship organizations that were receiving State Department money and USAID money that were sort of reinforcing the narratives that publications like Politico would put out there. And that's a sort of really stunning thing that I don't think a lot of people were really aware of before we started getting this peek behind the curtain because of Doge and these other efforts. Your boss, like me, have been doing this a long time, Hugo. Have you asked Hugo yet whether the Examiner's gotten any grants or money subscriptions from the AID? Because John Podhoretz from Commentary said we people on the right have been kind of stupid about this. We didn't even ask for any. That's right. We should have been marketing ourselves to the federal government. I know that the Washington Examiner at one point was blacklisted by some of these censorship organizations that were receiving taxpayer dollars through USAID and other agencies. So, everyone is sort of in DC is caught up in this sort of information loop that's been funded by our taxpayer dollars. Well, I want to distinguish for people sources versus paid access. I spend years developing relationships with, say, someone like John Thune, so that if I need the majority leader at some time in the next 2 weeks, I can book him if I really need him, and sometimes he will call and ask for an interview. That's a relationship with an influential source. I have the same with Leader McConnell. I've got the same with Donald Trump. I'm sure you do as well. I have no objection to that. That's journalism, but we don't pay for it. Yeah, I think, it's kind of shocking how the sheer volume of money that was going towards these subscriptions is staggering on paper, right? $35 million for subscriptions for reporters that are a lot of times professionally and even socially cozy with the very people that they're covering. That's the sort of thing that you see in political coverage, but also a less well understood aspect of that is it's also in policy coverage and trade publications. You see those sorts of incestuous relationships that American people are just like really fed up with right now. And the fact that so much money was spent on those media organizations and that they are in jeopardy just because the money was temporarily turned off for a couple of weeks is not something I think that was well understood before all this. I want to come back and talk to you about trade publications. That's not Politico. Trade publications are BNA, Environmental Reporter, which I used to get when I was practicing law, and trade publications are the federal. There are trade publications that you get to get into the weeds, but they're not this. And Sarah Bedford is the perfect person to talk about it. You can follow her, by the way, on X at Sarah C. Bedford, and you should. And follow DC Examiner, Sarah C. Bedford and DC Examiner. Sarah Bedford, investigations editor at the Washington Examiner, joins me. You can follow her at Sarah C. Bedford on X. Sarah, when we went to break, I was talking about the Beltway legacy media complex. And everyone knows I've been in this game since 1990, most of the time on the West Coast, 8 to 10 years in the Beltway doing this. And before that, I was in the Beltway. You've been doing this a while, too. So let's put your cards on the table. How long have you been a reporter covering the Beltway? Oh, gosh, about 10 years now. Okay, wow, so that dates me. 45 years between us. So we're not throwing stones from a glass house.
We try to develop sources, but there's a hierarchy. First of all, there's papers that come out every day. Now they become platforms that come out every day with reporters at the top of their game that develop sources. The Examiner is one of those. There are radio shows like mine that are every day. There's television shows that are every day like Fox News, Special Report. But then there are trade publications. Would you explain what those are?
Well, trade publications are typically focused on specific industries and breaking news within those agencies. Like, for example, if you're a real estate agent, there are trade publications that cover in a really niche way just what's going on in the real estate market. And so defenders of these Politico contracts would say that these are trade publications just focused on the business of legislating and regulatory policymaking. Obviously, this is sort of a self-perpetuating part of the Washington machine that's really unpopular right now, and it's an enormous expense of taxpayer money to get information that, you know, isn't necessarily that hard to dig up. Like you say, a lot of it is just counting votes, not developing sources the way other media outlets do.
And the more traditional trade publication, I mentioned BNA, which has done it for a long time, Inside EPA. There are some publications, and there are people that cover, God bless them, FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. When I was at first a young summer lawyer working for Baker and Botts, I had to go to FERC hearings as an associate, as a summer associate. God awful. But when FERC makes a decision, it impacts lots of companies with pipelines and gas and oil. Someone's got to be in the hearing room. They got to write up what FERC did today. That's not going to sell a newspaper, right? Have you ever been to a FERC hearing, Sarah?
No, and I don't really care to.
No, you don't want to go. I mean, people like it that do it, and lawyers get rich of it, but a trade publication was typically for people in the business. Politico was the first of what has become a forest of gossip sheets. There's Axios, there's Punchbowl, there's Politico, and there are others. There are newsletters from every old publication, probably the Examiner. Town Hall has one. Salem owns Town Hall. But we don't expect to be paid by the government. That's the difference. I mean, I'm just so shocked. Do you think anyone's not shocked?
I think there's a lot of DC insiders that have sort of defended this move, and even people in the journalism industry. It's the way that the industry has been moving. A lot of these non-trade publications, as you say, have been moving towards these subscription models because you just can't monetize traffic the same way you used to be able to. And so it's a more and more common move from these media companies. But like you mentioned, this isn't a sort of niche area where you have reporters covering, you know, these things that no one else is covering. Politico often covers the same things that a lot of these other outlets are covering, and it's just a staggering amount of money to pay for coverage that, like you mentioned, does feel widely available. Though I will say the Politico Pro tool, which the assumption from a lot of journalists is that that's what was being paid for, does go more in depth on counting votes and regulations and stuff like that. But that is also, a lot of that is open source anyway.
But let me ask you about this. This is the real nut to crack. If you are getting that much money, whether it's the low end $8 million a year or the high end $35 million a year, and the agency that is providing you asks you not to cover something or to spike a story or to please distort a story, isn't the temptation to say yes once you become addicted to the money?
Right. Of course. I mean, that is the conflict at the center of all of this controversy over the payments, right? Although I will say that is the conflict at the center of, I think, of most political journalism, is that you have this problem of access. You need to enjoy that access to your sources in the White House, to your sources on Capitol Hill, to continue to have them talking to you and giving you scoops. But at the same time, you're charged as a journalist with holding those people accountable and covering what they're doing critically. You see a lot of that access peddling in the way that the Biden White House operated, right? Reporters didn't report for a long time on what was obviously going on because of, in large part, fear of reprisals from other journalists, but also from White House aides. And so, you know, a lot of that is at the center of the concerns about a news organization receiving that much money from the federal government.
And then the last silo is ProPublica. Now, they've done some good work. I've had them on the program before. They've done some good work. but I don't know who funds them. And a lot of people think that ProPublica is funded by, let's just call it Soros World, which is a placeholder for everybody on the left that's got a lot of money and is doling it out. What do you think of ProPublica and whether or not we can trust their reporting?
Well, we've covered this at the Washington Examiner. ProPublica does take money from some left-wing sources and from some of those, dark money donor networks that fuel a lot of causes on the left. And critics would say that the ProPublica's coverage in recent years has reflected that. We've seen them report on, for example, allegations against conservative Supreme Court justices, and also a story that was pretty heavily criticized, and I think with good reason, about the abortion law, the effects of the abortion law in Georgia, and whether or not it was killing women because of the uncertainty with the new abortion ban there. So we have seen some really left-leaning ProPublica coverage, and it's funded by left-wing sources. So again, if you follow the money and you look at this critically, you can wonder whether funding shapes the coverage of these outlets that claim to be middle of the road and unbiased.
And not for profit and working in the public interest. I say hooey. If you can't tell me who's paying for it, if you don't have sponsors and you don't have advertising and subscription counts, somebody's buying it. And that smells bad. Hey, Sarah Bedford, it smells great. It smells great around the studio that you're back. We are so happy you are, and I am so glad you will be joining us weekly again. Welcome home. Great to have you on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Go and follow her on X at Sarah C. Bedford. Don't go anywhere, America. I'll be back to do disclosure after disclosure after disclosure. But the good news is we don't take any federal money, ever. Before I go to a disclosure, I would like you to hear what the president said about the Olympics in Los Angeles in 2028 when he signed the executive order making sure that girls and women's sports do not have boys and men playing in them. Here is the president.
In Los Angeles in 2028, my administration will not stand by and watch men beat and batter female athletes, and we're just not going to let it happen, and it's going to end, and it's ending right now, and nobody's going to be able to do a damn thing about it, because when I speak, we speak with authority.
I think the International Olympic Committee heard that. Did you hear that? I heard that. Do you think the Algerian boxer heard that? I think so. All right, here's my disclosure. It's going to really shock you. Relief Factor is a sponsor of the Hugh Hewitt Show. All right, I know you're reeling backwards. You're just saying what? Relief Factor? Hugh Hewitt is paid by Relief Factor? No, I'm actually not. Salem Media is paid by Relief Factor, but it comes downhill to me. But what the FCC requires is that when I do an endorsement and I do an embedded ad, that I reveal that the sponsor is Relief Factor and they pay us. I do that 3 times a day, 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year, because I love Relief Factor. I took it in the first hour. I take it every day. I tell you about it every day because I really love for you to try it. But if it's not Relief Factor, it's Hillsdale College. They're a sponsor of the Hillsdale Dialogue. We have no idea what we're going to talk about most times, but they sponsor the hour. How about Andrew and Todd? I tell you about them once a day, maybe only 3 times a week. Andrew and Todd's a sponsor. I always tell you that. What about American Federal? They do the market report every day. They sponsor that because they want you, if you're going to buy gold, to buy it from American Federal. And if you're going to try one supplement, then go to relieffactor.com or call up 1-800, the number 4 and the word relief, because it works. It helps your body get over minor aches and pain. Doesn't cure cancer, doesn't knit broken bones. It helps the anti-inflammatory system that your body has. Now, compare that with, for example, I have behind me a new book by Tom Cotton. Senator Cotton is a good friend of mine. 7 Things You Can't Say About China. Tom Cotton, United States Senator. I interviewed him this week about this, and I'm going to interview him about it for 6 more weeks, because there are 7 things you can't say about China, and I want you to... He's not paying me. He's not paying me. He's the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He's a friend. I have a great source. I have a great person to educate the American public. People think it's must listen to. You know what else is true? When I turn on Commentary Podcast, John is going to do a read in there for Quince. Quince, I've never bought Quince. It's in my head. Every day they drop in an ad for Quince. National Review. They've got some foundation supporting them. I can't remember what it is. Everybody who does this honestly has sponsors that they tell you about, or you know it's an advertisement. Dishonest, when the federal government is giving you a bunch of money that's going to impact how you cover the federal government. That's a scandal.